And I just want to say first and foremost, thank you all for being here. This is really a fantastic group of individuals. I've had the honor and privilege of working with most of you, and I'm so excited to have this conversation today. So like Orly mentioned, we have Stacy, Stuart, Rob, and Marci all here. I'm going to go over a brief biography of each one of them. And the idea with this session is to talk about the lessons that C3PAOs, which all four of you are representing here, what sort of lessons learned there have been with the voluntary assessments that have been happening in coordination with the DIBCAC. So with that, I'll start out with Stacy High-Brinkley. Stacy is the Chief Information Security Officer at Cask and has more than 25 years experience as an information security professional. Her background includes building and securing networks with expertise in establishing and implementing streamlined cybersecurity programs. Her expertise of the cyber domain includes technical aspects such as ensuring proper implementation of security controls and hardening networks, as well as non-technical and policy implementation. So welcome, Stacy. And Stuart Itkin, as Orly just mentioned, is the Vice President of CMMC and FedRAMP Assurance at Coalfire Federal. Stuart leads the company's CMMC, RPO advisory services and C3PAO assessment services, and its FedRAMP 3PAO assessment services for the federal side. Previously, the Vice President of Product Management at Boeing, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon Technologies, BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce Joint Venture Company, and ExoStar, Stuart has worked closely across the defense industrial base on solutions for supply chain management and secure collaboration. So welcome, Stuart. Rob Teague, Rob is a CMMC Provisional Assessor and a CMMC Certified Professional with over 30 years of operational and strategic leadership experience in information technology and cybersecurity operations with the U.S. Army. Rob is an advisor who travels globally to assist clients in preparation for Level 2 CMMC certifications to obtain Department of Defense contracts. So welcome, Rob. And last but certainly not least is Marci Womack. Marci is the Senior Manager at Schellman with over 10 years of information security experience across various industries and serves as a federal practice leader for both CMMC and FedRAMP. Marci holds multiple CMMC and cybersecurity related certifications, including CISSP, CMMC Certified Professional, and CMMC Provisional Assessor, and has extensive experience assessing multiple compliance frameworks. So welcome, Marci. So obviously, this is a panel of extremely educated and intelligent people when it comes to compliance, and especially CMMC and FedRAMP and NIST and all of the, NIST 800-171, all the different frameworks that we're probably going to talk about. So we'll go ahead and dive right in. Rob, one of the questions that we certainly get quite a bit from different people here at PreVeil, and I'm sure, this is something that people would really love to talk about. What's going on with voluntary assessments? What exactly, could you explain what a voluntary assessment really is? Because I think some of the people out there get confused with a voluntary assessment in the formal sense, working with the DIBCAC versus they are deciding to do some sort of gap analysis. So could you clear that up a little bit for our audience?
Sure. First of all, thanks for having me. It's good to be back with you, Noel and PreVeil. So the joint surveillance program, you heard Stacy talk about it a little bit earlier today. It's a joint assessment with the C3PAOs and the DIBCAC teams. So basically the DIBCAC comes in and does the DIBCAC high assessment, which is a bulk of NIST 800-171. And then the C3PAO comes in simultaneously. So we're all in the same sessions and we are doing NIST 800-171 assessment. Now, there's no additional cost to the organizations seeking certification, so the contracting companies. There's no additional cost for you to be in this program. And this program is more than likely going to be in effect until the interim rule comes into place early next year. There are some differences in the program now. So with the joint surveillance program, there's 2 additional meeting sessions that the DIBCAC will do with you, the contractors. It doesn't necessarily involve the C3PAOs, and that is a deep dive into DFAR 7012, mainly in the incident response, which really covers C through G. And then they're going to go in depth on some encryption topics with you. But other than that, at the end of the phase 2, which is the week-long interview session, the C3PAO sends their notes to DIBCAC so they can collaborate the 2 together, put them together, and then the DIBCAC will come out with the SPRS score. We determine whether you have met or not met the 800-171 assessment practices. And then when the interim role comes into play, we can pull down the CMMC certificate and issue it. So you do have some organizations that are very well prepared. We've heard a lot of conversations about the SPRS score. I do want to clarify that kind of the way it's working now is when you, the organization, sign on with a C3PAO, we add your name and preferred assessment date to an Excel spreadsheet that we send weekly with updates to the Cyber AB. The Cyber AB then takes that list from each C3PAO and combines them into one big one for the DIBCAC. Now, what the DIBCAC is really using to determine who's going to be assessed first, not really sure. I know the CAGE code played a role in the first 4 that were chosen. I'm sure the SPRS score plays a role as well. So the higher your score, the more likely you are to get selected for that assessment.
That's a really great overview of it. That's perfect. I think that answers a lot of questions for a lot of people out there, because I know I haven't heard a whole lot of discussion about CAGE codes, before now. So that is a good thing for us to get out there. And you mentioned there's different stages of readiness, which I think is a really important topic. And Stuart, I'd like to ask you, what kind of advice would you give to a company, an OSC, and an organization seeking certification that's going out there and going to hopefully get into this voluntary assessment program? What sort of preparedness or readiness do you think, what sort of practices would be best for that?
Well, obviously an organization, before it submits and agrees to go through, whether it's a regular CMMC assessment post the enactment of the interim rule, or whether it's through the voluntary joint surveillance assessment, certainly needs to ensure they're ready. And first piece of advice that we give to an organization, unless you feel you're 100% ready, if you're 100% confident, go ahead. If not, you probably aren't, and you shouldn't. But in general, you need to think about who the assessors are. And the assessors come with a variety of backgrounds, a variety of different skills and familiarity, with different technical environments, with different types of businesses. The range of businesses across the defense industrial base is really, really heterogeneous. And what we found is important, and advice that I'd share with people, is make it easy for your assessor to assess you. And first, I think it starts with providing a perspective of your business, what you'll be submitting to the assessor ahead of time, whether it's the DIBCAC or a C3PAO or both, is a whole bunch of documentation, SSP, policies, procedures. They have no context in which to really understand that. And I think providing a context to your assessor helps you and helps them in the process. The first thing that you can do to provide perspective really starts at the very beginning of the assessment with a process called an in-brief. The first steps are going to be that the DIBCAC or the C3PAO will do an in-brief of the assessment process. And I can tell you, it will be the same for everybody. It'll be a script, it'll be read. But then you, as an organization seeking certification, have the opportunity to do an in-brief. And this in-brief is really important because it does provide the perspective to the assessor and who you are. When we went and put ours together, we started in 20 minutes. We put together a pretty concise story. It started with, here's our company, who we are, and what we do. Second, because most of this was done virtually, we introduced them to the individuals that they would be speaking with through the course of the assessment, kind of associating the voice and the face with the people that they would be talking to. We wanted to humanize this. It just wasn't a voice on the other end of a Zoom call or a Teams meeting. Second, we've already told them about our company and what we do. We wanted to talk about our business. This is what our business is. This is what we do. We make this product for the defense industrial base, or we provide this service for the defense industrial base. And then we went through and showed an organizational chart in terms of who does it. And so, again, providing the perspective of who it is that they're looking at, and we morphed that to be able to show, so this is the scope of the assessment that you're going to be providing, showing them kind of the overall network diagram, where the people fit, where the IT fit, an overview of the IT that we have in place. In our case, sharing them that we have a Microsoft environment, that was based on Azure GovCloud and GCC High. But again, providing that context for them to be able to see and understand. We showed them the data flow diagram. So this is the CUI we handle. Here's how it flows through the organization. And finally, we spent time and just said, and let us explain our change management process, because this becomes one area that we'll find really gets drilled down on in the course of assessment. So the in brief, I think, is one key area. The other happens to do with curation of information that you're providing. So again, you're providing a lot of information to the assessor, whether it's the DIBCAC, whether it's a C3PAO or both. Make it easy for them to understand and see what it is that you're providing. With respect to an SSP, while it takes time, create a CMMC SSP rather than an 800-171 SSP. If you're going through a CMMC assessment, if you're going through a voluntary joint surveillance assessment, probably you want to make sure you have a 171 assessment that's following, again, the control families, the names, and so forth. If for each, state the assessment objective for each control and have a response for each. Clearly indicate the applicable policies and procedures. And policies and procedures are an important part of what it is that's put together. We were told by the DIBCAC the two main reasons that organizations fail in initial assessment is one, they've either misscoped their CUI boundary is wrong, or their documentation is inadequate or insufficient. Make sure the documentation is there. Final pieces that we did is that we put everything together. Configurations rather than having individual parameters or settings in each section of an SSP. We created a series of files of organizationally defined parameters all in one place so that it can be found and referenced. And similarly, we provided a traceability matrix by control. Think of it as an Excel spreadsheet, that was 320 rows, each assessment criteria indicating the SSP reference, the applicable policies, the applicable procedures, because policies and procedures could apply to more than one control, what the objective evidence, what the reference to 171 was. So again, it became the Bible for the assessor in looking at an individual control. Here's what I need to look at in being able to assess it. Don't volunteer too much information. If you share something and it satisfies the assessor, don't say, oh yeah, and let me tell you this, because they'll go down another rabbit hole and ask you other questions of things that you may not be prepared or want to answer. And finally, I think the selection of the objective evidence that you provide helps you control the assessment and guide the assessor. The things that you provide are going to be the things you get asked about. So be thorough, but be prepared to kind of the show me's. The show me's are going to largely come out of what gets provided to them from objective evidence. So, I think, key piece of advice, just make it easy for the assessor, help them understand who you are, what it is that they're going to be assessing, and what it is that they're looking at, so they have a context when they look at all that information and when they ask all those questions.
I love all of your response to that, but especially the part where don't invite more questions.
Right.
That's a fantastic piece of advice. And I saw everyone else on the panel kind of giggle to themselves to that too, because it's definitely, if you show an assessor something, they will look at it. So if it's not something you need to show them, just stick to what you have to do. Definitely.
Exactly.
Great advice. And to sort of piggyback on that, Stacy, what are some of the lowest scoring companies that you've seen? What are they doing wrong? What are some of the areas? I know that we saw a list, the DIBCAC presenters earlier put a list up of like sort of the top 10 issues that they've seen with like FIPS and FIPS validation and MFA and that sort of thing. But what are you seeing personally at Cask? What kind of issues are you seeing with those lower scoring companies? Or maybe just those companies that aren't as prepared?
Yeah, so basically, we're not privy to the scores. So when you say lowest scoring, highest scoring, we're not privy to that. We know some of the scores of the bigger companies, of course. But the folks that are having a hard time are some of the small and medium companies that are not prepared for the FIPS validation, the MF2A, multi-factor authentication on privileged and non-privileged accounts within your network. Which is nowadays kind of a basic thing, right? Everything's MF2A. You're always looking for your phone. Oh my God, where's my phone? I got to log in. So, there's a lot of things going on there. Surprisingly, a lot of companies, smaller, are having an issue with annual reviews, annual incident response plans, and actually scanning for vulnerabilities and such, and logging, audit logging. In the old days, when I was coming up, mainframe days and all that, we would have one person sit there and look at the logs and go, okay, this is my network. This is what it looks like. You would know the anomalies. You can't do that nowadays. You have to have a SIEM solution. You have to have an automated, whether it's Sentinel, whether it's Splunk, whatever it is, you have to have an automated logging solution to gain those controls, right? To actually have that solution in place. A lot of these smaller companies, from one person to 50 people, you need to have that in place. If you don't know what your network looks like today, right when you build your network, how are you going to be able to know if something's gotten into your network, right? I go back to the house all the time. People give me grief for it. But if there's 6 people living in my house and one day I come in, there's 7 people, I should notice that, right? Or if there's a lock or a door that's open, I should notice that. It's really not hard, but you need those automated tools. And a lot of companies can't afford those tools. They think they can't afford, but there are many tools they can. I think we're helpers. We help people get to these solutions that aren't breaking the bank. They're just trying to get by. Yes, granted, 7012 has been there for a lot of years. Those that have had that contract that says, hey, you have to be 7012 compliant. A lot of them didn't know that. Now they're going back going, please help us. And that's what we're doing. We're helping them with the MF2A, VPN, right? Making sure that CUI is encrypted end to end, things like that. So that's what we're seeing. That's what we're trying to help. And the DIBCAC is also helping, saying, hey, look, this is what we're seeing. This is where we need help. This isn't a, hey, we're out to get everybody. No, it's, hey, we're out to help everybody. Securing the DIB, right? That's the goal. So that's what we've been seeing.
I love that you said that at the end, because I think it can be inadvertently adversarial, and understandably, right? I totally understand. I've worked in the DoD a long time, and looking at it from that side, there are a lot of OSCs out there who are frustrated, and well, I've got 800 other things to think about and 800 things to pay for. But I think you make a really good point. The idea, though, is this needs to be a priority for so many reasons, and not the least of which is national security. But even aside from that, if you don't have that MFA or that FIPS encryption, that just makes it that much easier. Like what Rob Metzger was talking about, earlier today, that's just easier for you to get multiple vectors of attack, ransomware attacks or proprietary information getting stolen. It's not just national security, which that should be enough. But even if that's not enough, there are so many other personal things that can happen. Right. If you're not paying attention to that kind of thing.
Well, and basically, my insight over the DIBCACs, the number one thing is insider threat. It always has been. Security awareness training is huge. And you can't just do the 1 year cyber stuff, cyber challenge. You have to have it day in, day out. Do those phishing, the spear phishing, the whale phishing, do all that with your folks, set it up, send it out. I've been doing a lot lately and everyone's real paranoid. But it's the best thing to do because insider threat is huge. People click on links and that's it. They either get money or they get into your network.
Exactly.
Or shut you down, right?
Or possibly all of those things.
Yeah. And there's a lot of free training out there too. I mean, CISO has amazing tools out there, and there's so many more sites that it's not a money grab. Just reach out for help. There's a lot of free help out there to get you going.
Definitely. Well, thank you. That was very informative. And Marci, I wanted to ask you, this is something that we've also gotten a lot. I've personally had a lot of people ask me this question. So I want to hear a really solid response on this. I'm excited to hear what you have to say about it. Is every control of all the 110 measured and assessed, and what can you expect? So like NFO controls are a big thing that's come up in the past couple of months. People are sort of paying more attention to that. Mm-hmm. And then the cap just came out, right? A couple months ago now, is that being used? And then what is the role of those control objectives, which that is a long conversation, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts?
Totally. So yes, I'll start top down. All 110 practices or controls are assessed, even if you have some that are NA, wireless, for example, depending on your scope, depending on your boundary, wireless may not be applicable for that. But we still have a responsibility as assessors and as a C3PAO to go in and say, well, we need to validate that in fact it is not applicable based on all of that information. And so the long and short of it is yeah, we look at all 110, but moreover, all the assessment objectives in the assessment procedures, there are 320 of them. We look at every single one. We need to have an answer as assessors for every single one. And again, it could be, hey, this is not applicable, or they haven't had an occurrence of this, but here's how the process is handled. And they're mature enough to handle that once it does actually occur and when that occurrence happens. So I like to say it's an open book test. Look at those assessment guides because there's no secret. If you're looking at the top level practice or control, there's a lot of nuance that's missing there. So the assessment objectives really do a very good job of breaking down that kind of overarching practice to very discrete level, minor, like mini practices, I guess I would say. And so when we think about NFO controls, for example, we're not discretely looking at them, but in many cases, the intent of those NFO controls are baked into the other practices. So for example, if we think about all of the, what I call -1s, AC-1, AT-1, all the policies and procedure requirements that we see in 853, those are still baked into 171 because in each of the practice assessment objectives, there's going to be at least one objective that has blank been documented, has it been defined, and that really leans on the OSC's documentation, their SSP, their policies, and those procedures. And so if we look for that documentation, are you saying what you do and there's nothing there, then there's going to be a problem. Even if you are actually doing something for that control technically, that documentation piece is missing. So, and you'll see that throughout some of the NFO controls, they're really baked into other components of the 110 practices or requirements. So you mentioned the CAP. So this is a fun place to be, and I appreciate Rob and everyone else laughing because from the assessor's perspective, the CAP can be used, in our opinion, in like a notional context. So it's important to keep in mind as we're going through these joint surveillance assessments, but the reality of it is they are 171 assessments. They're not formal CMMC certification assessments yet. And so we use the phased approach. Those the 3 phases that were outlined in the CAP. We follow that because it's a logical way to execute our assessments. But when it comes to scoring, when it comes to whether something is implemented or not, or whether things can be remediated, we really rely on 171, the DoD assessment methodology, and then we coordinate with DIBCAC and we say, what's appropriate here? Let's make sure, because this is a joint assessment, let's make sure that we're on the same page and this is appropriate. And so the CAP is a guideline. It's still in draft. Once that's final, then we will need to obviously evaluate that as an ecosystem to understand how that moves into the joint surveillance and or just the formal CMMC assessments.
That was so much wonderful information. So it was great to hear that. And it's good to know about like the NFO controls kind of being sort of baked in. Because again, I know I myself have answered a lot of questions about NFO controls in the past few months. So it's good to know that this is not like an additional something that somebody has to worry about. These are controls that are already sort of in that 171 or CMMC version 2. So that was excellent. I'm glad maybe
I love that people are finally talking about the NFO controls. It's a little late for everyone's comfort level, but hey, we finally got there, right?
That's great. I'm glad that we're having the conversation, but it is interesting how people are seeing them not as sort of part of the experience already, but as an additional thing, like, oh gosh, I have to do this. It's not an additional thing. These are part of it. Just, do the 110. You should be fine. It's going to be okay. So good. I'm glad that we could settle some people's fears. So I have the last couple questions with the last like 15 or so minutes that we have left. And I'm going to sort of open these up for a conversation with everyone. So the first one is, rulemaking is nearly complete with CMMC as far as we know. And when do you think and this is for all of you, when do you think that DIB companies or OSCs should get started with NIST 800-171 and CMMC compliance?
2016.
Yeah, I was going to say yesterday.
Right.
About 6 years ago. Got it. Okay. Yesterday.
Right. Yeah, for anybody who hasn't started, they need to go find a time machine, go back 4 or 5 years and restart then.
Yeah. The
Truly.
main thing to keep in mind is that Rome was not built in a day. There are some of those practices that can be addressed within a day and resolved. There are others that are going to take time. If you have to bring in a big device or solution, it's going to have to go through your change management process. You got to do the risk assessments on it, then apply it, tune it, et cetera, et cetera. So just keep that in mind.
Well, and I think, that's an excellent point, Robert. It's a matter of how long the journey is going to take for somebody to really achieve the level of cybersecurity that is required. And we get asked a lot. Sometimes the question is, should an organization try to add security to their current environment, or should they essentially start over? And there are reasons and cases where it makes sense for one approach versus the other. But to be able to look at an organization spending 6 months minimum if they're really close, and perhaps 12 to 18 months if they are just starting on the process, it probably isn't realistic. I mean, is that consistent with your experiences?
Yeah, Stacy, Marci.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just jump in and say, I mean, if you have the institutional knowledge to really effectively judge where you're at, like in-house, so to speak, that's awesome. But like, don't be afraid to go out and get a third party, get a gap assessment, get some sort of delta assessment, be like, hey, where are we at? You're seeing all of these organizations, all of these various architectures. Where do we fall in that? It doesn't need to be the blown out, full certification assessment. You can get a stance of where you are and get a snapshot in time, because we and other assessors are the experts. And so it's good to get that kind of baseline like judgment call before you dive in and do the full certification as you start to make progress. So don't underestimate like just reaching out and say, hey, we need a third party view of this. Like, what do you think?
Yeah, and if I can go back onto what Stacy was talking about, logs, folks, please remember back in the day, it used to be the person you stuck in the corner. You'd feed them Mountain Dews, Pepsis, chips, cookies, all kinds of stuff to keep them happy as they went through log after log after log. Those days are gone. You need a SIM solution that can correlate that data and notify you if something's happening in your environment.
Well, I think that's an excellent point, Rob. And then also to what Marci said about gap analysis, that's actually a really good point. Do all of you agree that a gap analysis, if not essential, but would be like strongly encouraged for anyone who's going through an official assessment?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because there's 110 controls, but as Marci said, within that there's 320 objectives. So there's so many more items than folks realize. And if you look at the guides, or if you look at the NIST documentation assessment methodology, that can help you. But like in the olden days, when network security, as we used to call it, they didn't pay us. They just said, hey, make sure we're secure, shut the firewall off, right? Now, then it was something else. Now it's cyber. Well, we need to make sure that all of the folks that are DIB contractors have cyber folks. Logistics companies, fence baking companies, people like that don't have cyber. So they read the contract and they just go right over DFAR 7012. They have no clue they have these requirements. That's an issue. People have been calling us saying, what in the world is this? And they should have been compliant a long time ago, but they had no idea. So I think communicating and everything that DoD and Cyber AB has been doing to make people aware of, hey, you guys need to be safe. I mean, besides the fact that everyone's getting hacked or has been hacked, everyone's kind of going, okay, how can you help us? And that's what's important, the gaps, the pre-assessments, preparing you for your assessment. If you don't have in-house cyber doing self-assessments, get a gap. Say, hey, look, I don't know about these 70 controls over here. Can you help me? Or these 20, just get it done. And then you'll be ready for your assessment. And then you can move on and be secure, right?
Yeah. I'd say that,
go ahead.
Yeah, I'm going to say that, and while the gap is absolutely an essential component, it's not necessarily the first step for every organization. I mean, the first step in many cases is, understand what is the CUI you have, what is the boundary that you need to be able to protect, and do you need to change it in some way? And that's really the first step. And it's surprising how many organizations don't have an understanding of the CUI they're receiving or the CUI they're creating, or what are the requirements to be able to ensure that it is properly segregated to be able to secure it and satisfy those requirements. So gap assessment, absolutely, but know what it is that you need to protect and have it protectable before you start the process.
Mm-hmm. Now, one thing we haven't really touched on is sustaining it. Once you become compliant, right, you need to sustain that compliance over a period of 3 years.
Yeah.
There are plenty of ways that you can do that. You can partner with RPOs, C3PAOs, whatever you need to do. The other thing is train internal personnel so that they understand CMMC so they can keep you compliant throughout the 3 years, which is probably the most preferred. So just keep that in mind as well. But it's a heavy lift to get prepared. And if you haven't started it yet, then you're already way behind the power curve.
Yeah.
Continually monitoring your security, period.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And usually what I tell our, folks that I talk with is CMMC is nothing different than what has been out there with DFARS, right? We've said that over and over. But the main thing CMMC and the DFARS and NIST 800-171, it's all about control. It's about control, monitoring, trust but verify, et cetera, et cetera.
Right.
And I think that's such a good point, that this can't just be something that you do the one time and then 3 years you're like, I'll just worry about it in 3 years when it comes up again. That's not how that works. And also this is a point that I think some people have kind of overlooked as well. And I'd love to get the opinions of everybody on the panel for this. If I am an organization and I go through and I get myself a CMMC certification level 2, I'm good to go. And then I just sort of like forget about it for the next 2.5, however many years. And then I just sort of like rush at the end to get it done. Are you guys going to take a much harder stance on an organization that does that, where you can very obviously see nothing has happened for 2.5 years and then suddenly things are, or does it make a difference, just out of curiosity?
I don't think it would be a harder stance. It's going to be very obvious from the get-go after a few of the questions, and looking into some of the artifacts provided that things have changed and nobody's kept up with it. And that's going to be very bad news for you. So I don't think it would be any harder, but it's definitely going to be something that is very prominent when the assessors sit down with them.
Yeah. I think part of this is going to be through an assessment, not only looking is the box checked, but is somebody doing what it is that they've said? Are they using what it is that they've said? And what's its efficacy? Is it producing the result that's intended? So if the ink is still wet on a policy and you can't demonstrate, that you understand, for example, your incident response plan, you're not going to pass. And so really, it's about ensuring that not only have you done all of this, but it's been institutionalized. I don't think there's specific guidance for how much objective evidence, how far it needs to go back. But I can tell you, if it was just finished yesterday, it's certainly not going to be acceptable.
It's going to be obvious because you're going to be vulnerability scanning. You're going to be scanning your networks. You're going to be doing your incident response plan annually. You're going to be ensuring that any changes to your security posture are reviewed and your SSP is updated. Your SSP is a living document. It's not something you just go, oh, every 3 years I better. No, we update our SSP anytime there's any changes to our network. And that is what cyber is all about. Cyber secure and NIST and everything is making sure you're continually monitoring your network inside and out and your personnel to ensure you are always ready, right? And not just so you can win contracts for DoD, so you can be there for your company and make sure that your company's integrity is intact, showing your due diligence. I think that's very important.
And if I can share just from real quick, Marci, just from the assessment we did as part of one of the first joint surveillance programs, it was very obvious to the provisional assessors and to the DIPCAC assessors that their administrators within that organization were actually using and doing and performing all of those functions daily. It was almost like muscle memory for the administrators.
Right.
When we would ask for a test, you know, to see the configuration, let me see if you can get into this and you're not authorized. Click, 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 done. I mean, that is something that's very obvious and the assessors take note of.
Yeah.
Yeah, the
Right.
only thing I was going to add as well is, you know, the name of the game to some extent is maturity, right? So if you've been following the CMMC journey through its, you know, all the transitions, we've obviously, you know, we don't have those process requirements anymore, but maturity is still important. And so to Stacy's point, we're going to be able to tell if those control activities that occur on a per frequency basis, whether that's quarterly or monthly or whatever that organization has defined, because they do have to define it and then actually do it. It's very apparent to us when that is not happening. And so that maturity piece really ties into it, you know, the assessments being performed every 3 years, but those activities still need to happen as they are defined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I do want to circle back to, I think it was somebody that mentioned in one of the earlier sessions, there are plenty of free things out there to assist all these organizations. There are some states that actually have grants that assist OSCs in preparing for the stuff. I sat in with an organization this morning, very prominent, very useful, very helpful, a lot of free tools. So if you're one of those small companies that's struggling, for example, you have one IT guy that you contract with and he comes in every now and then to work on your network, you may want to look at some of those grants for your state because it may apply for you.
That's a really excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up, Rob. And the last question that I have, and we've kind of, you know, sort of included a lot of the answer to this and what we've talked about, but I think it'd be good to sort of surmise it. What are the risks to a DIB company that waits or postpones their compliance efforts? You know, maybe they're thinking, I'm just going to wait until after rulemaking is done. Like I don't really have to worry about it today. And I'm not, you know, and maybe CMMC is going to change and I'm just going to wait. What do you think, what do all of you think the risks are to that sort of mentality?
Well,
I'm happy.
Go ahead.
Okay, it's a matter of where to start. I think one perspective is there's a lot of organizations, as you said, that are waiting. And you know, kind of if we look at from a number standpoint, there's 80,000 of them out there at least. And there aren't that many of those of us who can either help you get ready or who can assess you. And you know, I think that we're all going to get pretty busy, you know, looking into next year and getting further as organizations realize this is real. And if you're looking for support, you know, certainly calling any one of our organizations, you've got people who've made commitments to understanding the requirements and working with companies. But I have a feeling that, you know, there are many that are going to be looking for our help and the help of others that are out there. The risk is you just may not be able to, you know, to get in line soon enough to meet a requirement to get on a contract that has CMMC requirements.
No, that is really the risk. The risk is to your business, right? And we've all seen the movie, if you're not first, you're last. So imagine bidding on a contract that requires CMMC compliance. You haven't done CMMC yet, and then you contact a C3PAO to try and get an assessment quickly. They're already booked throughout the year. So how is that going to work for you? You've really just shot yourself in the foot business-wise. So keep that in mind.
Right.
That's a good point. How busy, just, you know, for all four of you, you're all C3PAOs, how busy are you guys right now with the scheduling of these assessments? Even, you know, I'm assuming you guys are pretty booked at this point.
Well, again, and I'll jump first. The joint surveillance program is controlling a lot of that flow as they pick, you know, and we start to conduct assessments. But for us at Redspin, we're booked already into second quarter.
That's crazy. I think that's going to be kind of shocking to a lot of people who are sitting here, those people who are waiting. So that is a great risk. So is that something that all of you are seeing, that there are a lot of people who, I mean, obviously there are a lot of people who are waiting, but are you seeing a lot of people who are excited and who are like getting
Right.
on board and scheduling out far in advance for everyone else as well?
Yeah, absolutely. We see a lot of people who come and want to be first. We had somebody that reached out to us a week ago and said, hey, we want to sign up with you for an assessment, you know, so that we can be assessed as soon as the interim rule gets into effect. We said,
Wow.
we're happy to contract with you, but there's a line and you'll be at the end of that line. And to Robert's point, it's a several quarter line at this point.
Oh goodness. Is that, Stacy, is that what you're experiencing too? And Marci, same on your side?
Yeah, and just remember, no matter what happens with CMMC rulemaking, this 800-171,
Exactly.
it's too late.
Yeah.
Yeah, and we have people, we have a lot of pre's and gaps because people want to make sure they're ready and putting their score up there now, because as soon as they get assessed, that's it. I mean, it's already there. CMMC is coming, but NIST 800-171 has already been there. So I can't stomp my foot enough. If you're not ready, if you're not getting ready, you're going to start losing contracts. We are a DIB contractor. We see it come across in our documentation all the time. And it's kind of funny because about a year ago, I from a big company we were teaming with, they said, "Are you CMMC certified?" And I had so much fun with that. I was like, nobody is, you know? And I was like, but we are NIST 800-171, and we did get a score of 130 because we went through it when we were, you know, in CMMC 1.0. So that was real fun. But remember, it's already there. It's not something coming, it's here. It's been there for a while.
Right, definitely. And Marci, did you have another follow-up? We have
no, literally ditto to everyone on the panel here. No worries if we repeat it, but they hit the nail on the head for all of it.
No, perfect. Well, I just want to say thank you to all four of the panelists, Stuart, Stacy, Rob, Marci. This has been an amazing conversation. I think a lot of really incredible information for all of our audience, and a lot of stuff that, you know, even I was kind of questioning a little bit, and it's great to get the experts on to talk about it. So it's been a fantastic opportunity for us to talk about all this and get all of your experiences. So thank you all so much for joining us. And I believe that Orly, you have the next session after me, I'm assuming.